fourth of those which had been produced at Antioch. They condemned the opinions of Arius and those of Marcellus alike. The bishops of the East, assembled at Antioch, feeling that they were regarded with suspicion in the Western Church as inclining to Arianism, again endeavored to clear themselves from the charge. In an exposition of their faith, which from its length came to be known as the Prolix Exposition, they expressed their belief in the only born Son of God, begotten of the Father before all ages, God from God, light from light, through whom all things were made. And they anathematized those who affirmed that the Son was made from nothing, ex uk auton, or from a different substance, ex heteros hypostaseos, or that there was a time when he was not. The 9th chapter of the Prolix Exposition might indeed be considered as a paraphrase of the word homoousios, but they also condemned those who said that it was not by wishing or willing that the Father begat the Son. In this they condemned the Athanasians, who held that the eternal generation of the Son is of the essence of the Father, as inseparable from him as his holiness or his wisdom. To say that the Son was produced by the wish or will of the Father seemed to them to approach perilously near to saying that he was a creature, though against this conclusion the bishops at Antioch had expressly guarded themselves. The Eastern bishops seem to have been genuinely anxious to find terms of agreement with their Western brethren, and they were certainly very far from holding those opinions of Arius which had been condemned. But no reconciliation was effected. A Western council at Milan rejected their overture. They also found themselves under the necessity of condemning a new heresy, that of Photinus. He was a fellow countryman and disciple of Marcellus, and the Antiochene sentence of condemnation seems to attribute to him little or nothing beyond the views of his master. As, however, the Western Council at Milan also condemned Photinus, while it protected Marcellus, it seems probable that he maintained not merely that the Son had no personal existence from eternity, but that Christ was simply a man, destined by God to a unique work, and so wrought upon by his inworking as to attain divine excellence. The Emperor Constantius had hitherto been unfriendly to Athanasius and his party. At last, hard pressed by the Persians and anxious at all costs to restore peace in his dominions, he permitted the great bishop to return to Alexandria, where meanwhile the intruder Gregory had died. He was received with a tumult of joy by his faithful people. The Orientals were dissatisfied at the restoration of Athanasius without the decree of a council, but otherwise the difference between the opposing parties seems at this time to have been reduced to 2 points: the refusal of the Western bishops to condemn Marcellus, and the continued rejection by the Easterners of the word homoousios. Those opinions of Arius which had been condemned at Nicaea were almost everywhere rejected. But the death of Constans brought about a great change in the politics of the time. Constantius had paid a certain deference to his brother, who favored Athanasius. Now he asserted his independence, and perhaps wished to repay the humiliation which he thought he had suffered at the hands of the Western bishops. A synod which first met at Sirmium in 351 put forth a confession of faith identical with the Fourth of Antioch, and deposed Photinus, who had up to this time remained in possession of the see of Sirmium. To the confession was appended a long series of anathemas, in the 18th of which the Son is expressly declared to be subordinate to the Father, hypotetagmenos. This was not generally accepted in the West, though so high an authority as Hilary of Poitiers thought it compatible with orthodoxy. When, shortly afterwards, Constantius became, by his victory over the usurper Magnentius, the sole ruler of the empire, he acted with more vigor and decision in the affairs of the Church. From synods assembled at Arles and Milan, he succeeded in extorting the condemnation of Athanasius as a rebel, leaving the theological question for the present out of sight. The Orthodox were not compelled to accept any new formula of belief, but the more sharp-sighted among them could not fail to be aware that in the condemnation of Athanasius lurked more than a personal question. The few bishops who refused to concur, Paulinus of Treves, Eusebius of Vercelli, Lucifer of Cagliari, and Dionysius of Milan, were driven into exile, and to these were soon added Liberius of Rome, Hilary of Poitiers, and the aged Hosius of Cordova. Early in the year 356 his sentence of deposition was formally communicated to Athanasius, who at once withdrew into the wilderness and was lost to sight. He was beyond the emperor's power, for no one would earn the price put upon his head by betraying him to his enemies. George of Cappadocia was brought into Alexandria by force of arms as his successor. The unity of the church seemed to be restored. The emperor seemed to be supreme over it. The party opposed to Athanasius seemed to be completely victorious. But in fact, the political victory of the eastern bishops brought about their ruin. No sooner was the pressure of adversity removed than the ante-Nicene party flew asunder. They had only been united by their hostility to Athanasius and the Homoousion. The real Arianism, the Arianism which had been condemned at Nicaea, started once more into full view. Aetius and Eunomius, keen and ruthless dialecticians, carried it to its logical issue and declined all compromise with orthodoxy. These Eunomians declared that the Son was different in essence from the Father, unlike Anomaios in essence and in all respects. However superior the Son might be to the other parts of creation, he was still created. The great majority of the Oriental theologians did not share these views. They maintained that the Son was like Homoios, the Father in essence and in all respects, and that his eternal generation was by no means an act of creation. But they declined, alarmed perhaps by the theories of Marcellus, to admit that the Father and the Son are of one and the same essence. The leaders of this Homoiousian party were George of Laodicea, Eustathius of Sebaste, Eusebius of Emesa, and Basil of Ancyra, and their views made some impression even upon eager advocates of the Nicene doctrines, like Hilary of Poitiers, who were in exile among them. The emperor was still eager for unity at any price, and the court party among the bishops, especially the pliant Arsacius of Singidunum and Valens of Mursa, with Acacius of Caesarea and Eudoxius of Antioch, were anxious to devise a formula which should unite Homoians and Anomoians. By a third Sirmian council, at which the emperor was present, the words Homoousios and Homoiousios were absolutely forbidden, as not contained in Scripture, and as attempting to define matters above the reach of man's understanding. The subordination of the Son was again affirmed. This formula was mainly the work of Western bishops, hitherto the great champions of orthodoxy, but it was highly displeasing in the East. Constantius seems in some way to have been won over to the views of the more moderate party, and a fourth Sirmian council put forth as their faith that which had been set forth at the Dedication Council of Antioch in the year 341, together with the condemnation of Paul of Samosata and Photinus, which had been agreed upon at Sirmium 10 years later. In the year 358, the exiled Liberius bought his return to Rome by subscribing, to use his own words, the true Catholic faith received at Sirmium by many brethren and fellow bishops, and by repudiating Athanasius. What was the formula which he subscribed? Whether the first or the second of Sirmium has been matter of vehement dispute. It is, however, hardly possible to suppose that the indignation which Hilary expresses against the weakness of the Roman bishop can have been called forth by his having accepted a formula which he himself thought compatible with orthodoxy. He must therefore have subscribed the second. Hosius was also allowed to return home on accepting this formula, which he did under durance, but without repudiating Athanasius. The emperor, however, was still dissatisfied. He designed that a great synod under his own influence should devise a formula in which the various parties might agree. What actually came to pass, however, was not one synod, but two. In May 359, 400 Western bishops assembled at Rimini, who were required by the emperor to debate only matters of doctrine, and forbidden to separate until they should have arrived at a conclusion. Ursacius and Valens, however, who acted as the emperor's ministers in ecclesiastical affairs, were at first altogether unable to carry out his wish that the formula lately settled